Hello, this is Ben Cubbage from Whiteboard Jesus, and this is part 3 of Jeremiah chapter 2 called Broken Cisterns. Today we're looking at Jeremiah chapter 2 verses 13 through 25. Jeremiah 2:13 it says, "My people have committed two sins. They have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water." This is from Jeremiah chapter 2 verse 13. This is going to be our key text today as we go through and talk about broken cisterns. There are two major sins listed here in Jeremiah 2 verse 13. And the first, of course, is forsaking living water, forsaking the source of living water. This refers to a natural artesian well, which means it was a spring just bubbling right out of the ground. Think about how much work the people had to do in the desert to get water, dipping and carrying heavy jugs with water slushing everywhere for miles is backbreaking work. Panting, sweating, heaving day in and day out with no respite. And it was not just for you, it was for your kids, your camels, your sheep, your guests. Today we just turn on the tap and voila, the water flies out endlessly in our convenient modern times. But these people faced droughts, dangerous situations, even being robbed just to get a cup of water. The simplest of tasks was complicated then by a factor of 10 or 20 times. And everything you did, making bread, washing your dishes, every life task, required an extreme amount of effort to go down to the well, to pump it out, haul it up, scoop it out, carry it back, and then store it sufficiently, all just to barely survive. And even when you had it, you had to hold on to it like it was your last dollar. Israelites in the desert must have always been ruthlessly conserving water and wondering when the next arduous water run was going to be. It was an endless cycle of feeding the ever-growing and never satisfied beast, the beast of your own thirst. And if you did not feed the beast, the need to live from water and starvation and dehydration consumed you, and you could find yourself dead in a dry and dusty land. So probably the best gift you could give any water-weary carrier, better than 7 camels or a new second-story home, was the gift of an artesian well. It suddenly meant that a person had a source of clean, dependable drinking water to feed them and their families. Of course, we can't just gift a natural artesian well like a Christmas present, but for those who had the good fortune to have one of these on their property, this was the gift of life. So we see in the same way, our God is our source of life. It just bubbles up for free. We do not need to carry around any heavy jugs of legalism or feigned importance in an endless cycle of trying to impress God with our good works. God's water is fresh and endless and just dances merrily right out of the ground like God's never-ending love for us. There's nothing we did to earn it, and we don't have to particularly be stingy when we have it because it's limitless. We just sit back and enjoy the gift, not earned or bought, but given freely to us as life. There's too much to say about the spring of God in our lives. But at the very least, we can say that God is our life spring. All my fountains are in Him, and He is the originator and creator of everything. He gives you everything you have, not just your life, but it's every breath. Your every second is a gift given to you by the spring of life. In Colossians 1:17, it says, "He is before all things, and in Him all things hold together." And then in John, verses 7:37 through 38, it says, "On the last and greatest day of the festival, Jesus stood and said in a loud voice, 'Let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as Scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from within them.'" God's spring can burst from within us. The Israelites forsook this amazing source of life. When Jewish people toast a glass of wine today, they say, "L'chaim." It means life and celebrates the Lord as giver of life. This is an idea that the Jews of Jeremiah's time may have physically spoken, but their lives did not square with their belief that God really was their rushing spring of life. Otherwise, they would not have built their own false cisterns. That brings us to the second crime that Jerusalem has committed. Not only did they forsake the real living water, they hewed out broken cisterns. They left the one thing that could satisfy and made disappointing fakes. You can definitely know that a man's water that had been sitting for a month in some carved out rock was never going to taste as good as the sweet, flowing, fresh, living water from God's own spring. It was stale and stagnant and probably gathered dead bugs, chips of rocks, and maybe even mosquitoes or diseases. This was a survival strategy in the desert, but it was nothing compared to the real, original fountain of God's goodness. As an example of this, take the time that me and my wife were hiking 100 miles of the Arizona Trail during our baby moon. That was the time just before we were having our first baby, Phoebe. And we ended up passing through several stretches of trail in Arizona that had no streams or rivers for 20 or 30 miles. When you are backpacking with everything you own in your backpack, this is a long way to walk through a 95-degree desert with no refreshment or no water. On a few of our water stops, we had to drink from a horse and cow trough because there's no other water sources along the way. The trail routed us through a countryside Arizona farm full of cactuses and bone-dry dirt, and there was no sign of water anywhere else. This was it. This was our one chance to rehydrate for the whole day in a 15-mile hike, and it was nasty. There was cow drool everywhere. The rusted metal trough was hot and full of grass and chewed cud. It was something more of a sewer drain than a faucet. And as I think back to this experience, I think that is something of what God is talking about here in the broken cistern idea. It's a pretty pathetic way to eke out an existence. And this is how many of us choose to live when we reject God's goodness and insist on living on our own grungy, stagnant terms, building our own cisterns that don't work. That is all we can do. We can't make our own water or create our own lives. We can only build receptacles to collect what God freely gives us. But eventually, no matter how big and great your cistern is, the thing is going to crack when it's going down, and it's going to leak. Imagine collecting and storing water all year, like a chipmunk collecting nuts for water, only to find your 6 months of labor has spilled through an unseen crack. All your work is ruined. This is the picture of the futility of living apart from God. We can gather more TikTok followers, more girlfriends, more travel experiences, more income, more properties, more business deals and handshakes and networking contacts. You can even gather more worship songs, more YouTube messages, more information on God to add to your vast theological spreadsheet. You can build huge cisterns that are brimming with water, and it feels secure and steady, but they will all eventually crack and leak. Our hearts yearn for eternal water from God, and no cistern we can build is going to fill that up. Because no matter how much you accumulate to fill your cistern, you are going to find yourself empty, with a puddle of your life's work sadly seeping out at your own feet. This is the story of the broken cistern, and this is why God is saying, I want you to reinvest, to remember the very spring of life that I gave you in the beginning. Going to Jeremiah 2:14 through 19, we see that it says, Is Israel a servant, a slave by birth? Why then has he become plunder? Lions have roared. They have growled at him. They have laid waste his land. His towns are burned and deserted. Also the man of Memphis and Tahpanhes has cracked your skull. Have you not brought this on yourselves by forsaking the Lord your God when he led you in the way? Now why go to Egypt to drink water from the Nile? And why go to Assyria to drink water from the Euphrates? Your wickedness will punish you. Your backsliding will rebuke you. Consider then and realize how evil and bitter it is for you when you forsake the Lord your God and have no all of me, declares the Lord Almighty. Earlier in the chapter, God had promised to protect the people of Israel. But now Jeremiah looks forward prophetically and says, soon you will be slaves. Israel, confronting a terrifying onslaught from the Babylonian Empire and in her last days before exile, has a few options here. She can submit to God's plan and go through the dark valley of exile with God. And this is the plan that Jeremiah continually puts forward in his letters in the book of Jeremiah. but people don't like the word surrender, and they try to find some clever way out of their situation. So, like the television game show, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, when a contestant is not able to answer a crucial question on their own, they decide to phone a friend for help. But the thing is, Israel is not doing too well in the International Diplomatic Friend Department. The only options strong enough to conceivably keep the Babylonian bullies at bay are the Egyptians and the Syrians. Both of these are tough bullies in and of their own right. And it's kind of a choice of all the lesser of all the evils. This is the very situation God refers to when he says in Jeremiah 2:18, "Now why go to Egypt to drink water from the Nile, and why go to Assyria to drink water from the Euphrates?" Israel is looking to some other pagan nations to pull her out of her helpless pit. But the nations, Egypt and Assyria, are false hopes and will be no more of a help to her than Babylon itself. They are trading one misery for another. The difference is that God is in the misery of Babylon, and even will show his mercy and kindness in the middle of the discipline. But if they walk out from the consequence, trying to avoid the warnings of Jeremiah, the options are not good. When you are in trouble, what resources or people do you desperately grapple for? What is your savior in a tough situation? Do you try to wiggle out of a tough discipline situation, or try the easy shortcut out to get out of a tough situation? Or are you willing to stay there and camp in the middle of it with God and hear what he would say to you? In Jeremiah 2:17 it says, "Have you not brought this on yourselves by forsaking the Lord your God when he led you in the way?" Interestingly, Jeremiah does not blame it on the wicked Babylonians who will come in and pillage Jerusalem and the southern kingdom. It would be easy to point the finger for Israel's troubles to that physical army, to that wicked nation and their cruelty. And certainly Babylon was the instrument of punishment and correction the Lord used. Instead, God looks at their future slavery, the crushing and humiliating of their own nation, and tracks it back to the people of Israel and says, "It's your own fault." He says, "Have you not brought this on yourselves?" These are no words that people like to hear. We avoid them at all costs. When I'm late to a meeting, I want to justify myself by making excuses and telling everyone, there's heavy traffic, or sorry, I had an emergency at home. I will easily blame my kids, my cats, my phone, anything just to get the pressure off me of being late. We are always looking for excuses because we do not want to take responsibility. We would rather lie to the people who love us the most just to justify ourselves than to sit with the discomfort of someone challenging us, thinking us irresponsible or lacking. We do not want to admit that our uncomfortable or terrible situation is our own doing. We will blame the weather, the economy, our mother's genes, cultural stereotypes, our boss, our flawed parents, and 100 other things before we dare to take an ounce of responsibility for our own fates and say, "Yeah, I brought this on myself." But God does not let them blame the Babylonians. He says, "This came from you." Anytime you're in spiritual slavery, it's easy to blame the environment or your bad luck or the bad hand you were dealt. But before those chains ever got put on you, before the oppressor ever came to burn your houses, crack your skull, or take you as their possession, you made a decision. You made the decision to forsake the Lord after all he did for you. He gave you life. He died a bloody death on a cross. He gave you the house and the kids and saved your son in that hospital room. He spoke his words in the Bible so that you could know him and hear his voice. He did all that in the case of Israel. He took them from out of slavery and gave them a beautiful inheritance in the promised land. And all they could do is walk away and say, "I can't hear the voice of the Lord anymore." If you want to know where the root, the real beginning of spiritual slavery and addiction starts, don't look to your circumstances. Don't look at the thing or the lust or the expectation or the relationship that causes you so much damage and degradation. Look back at yourself. It started with you long before it was about them. The them is just the fruit and a reflection of the consequence of you. You made a choice that led you here. You strayed from the Lord, and the Lord still kindly, softly offers you a chance to repent and come back. There's always a seat at the table for you. But will you take it? Like Israel, God can warn us. God can invite us back into his presence and goodness. But you have to be the one to first take responsibility for your own misery and then turn back to God for his mercy. I want to add a caveat here that not every problem or difficulty is your own fault, a sin problem. So we have to look at this as a spectrum and with balance to the rest of the word, lest we set out on a continual Salem witch hunt to find ourselves at fault at all times, even when that is unnecessary. Remember that Job encountered great sorrow and suffering, and his friends tried to tell him that it was his own doing, and he said, truthfully, that it was not. Not every pain comes as a consequence to your own idolatry. Job experienced affliction because that was how God was best glorified and represented in Job's life. Jesus tells us a story in John 9:2-3 that helps us know not every difficult situation is a direct result of our own sin. In John 9:2-3 says, his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. We have to remember that not every woe in our lives is our own fault. We live in a fallen world, and bad things do happen that are out of our control. But certainly this responsibility was true in the case of Jerusalem in Jeremiah's time, and it may be true of you as well. It's certainly worth looking a little deeper into our own sufferings, our failings, our disappointments and trials, and asking, God, deep down, what part did I play in this? Did this start in small decisions by walking away or ignoring you? Whatever you find the answer to be, whether your own faithlessness results in 0%, 50%, or 100% of your own problems, I can tell you that those difficulties are not accidents. They're there for a reason. They are there to refine you and bring out the gold in you. They are allowed to be there by the sovereign hand of God, and they can and will be used to make you into the person that is a closer picture of who you are meant to be and the victory you are supposed to carry in Jesus. This is Ben Cubbage. Subscribe for more in Bible teaching as we keep going through the book of Jeremiah. Thanks for joining us today in Jeremiah chapter 2.